Ask a Priest Live. Guided by the Holy Spirit and honoring the magisterial teachings of the Church. Faithful Catholic priests answering questions for believers and those seeking truth. Ask a Priest, because Father knows best. And now, your host, Jordan Pacheco.
God be praised in his angels and in his saints. Hello, everybody, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back, friends, to Ask a Priest Live. We are very happy you're here with us on this great Monday. Yeah, I'm very excited about this show. I've been waiting for it for a couple weeks now, and I'm very happy that we managed to snag the man. So I'm going to be having a great episode with Bishop Joseph Strickland today. You all know him. You all love him. He's been on the show before, by the way. So if you haven't listened or watched that episode, you should totally check it out. So if you're listening right now, which means you're listening live, we actually did this pre-record a little bit earlier in the day. So I know that some of you are going to be like, I should have called in, but don't worry. There's always next time he's back on, I'm sure. So Your Excellency, so happy that we are back on together. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Yeah, quite fine. Thank you. So the big question, you were just in Kansas City and I have family out there and I live in St. Louis, just up the river. So the big question is, as a native Texan, are you willing to admit that KC barbecue is better than Texan barbecue?
Well, as a native Texan, I'd plead the fifth.
That's all right. That's very acceptable. Very happy that we're on together, Your Excellency. We had a lot of our listeners send in some questions for this pre-record today, and there's some great ones on the document. So I say without further ado, friends, we're going to go ahead and get to these questions. Starting with this one here, Bishop. This comes from Sean. A little bit of a preamble. When the U.S. bishops have come out with statements about federal tax policy, it raises a lot of questions in my mind about the role of government in Christian charity. Are we practicing Christian charity when we depend on the government to take money from earners and redistribute it in the form of government welfare programs? There are many solutions to helping the poor, and government welfare isn't the only one possible solution. And in my opinion, it's proven not to be a very good solution. That being said, I feel that true Christian charity comes not through support of such programs, not through the ballot box, not through some government bureaucracy, but from the heart of every individual Christian who sacrifices their own times, talents, and treasures to direct services to the poor. Why wouldn't the church focus on that rather than partisan politics? Yeah, let's start strong.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with the sentiment of the question that has a lot in it. And I believe we do need to look for better ways of infidelity to Christ. I mean, we're called to share our resources. We're called to give alms. I mean, that's the spiritual call that we share, and how we do that and how the structures work. I don't claim to have all the answers to exactly the proper way to do this, but as we've seen, not-for-profit organizations, including the church herself, have gotten caught in compromise. When we compromise the truth of the gospel for the purpose of gaining donors or gaining anything of this world, we're on the wrong path. And I think what comes to mind for me, I think of this scripture all the time, but where Christ himself says, be as cunning as serpents and as gentle as doves. And I think we really need to take that to heart. And I guess in my own perspective, I think in this time in the world, where we really have to be cautious is it's easy, in a sense, to get so deep into the cunning side that we forget the gentility of the doves, and that remembering, in a big part of it, really, Jordan, is humility. Remembering that we know the answers, we know truth incarnate, Jesus Christ, but none of us can claim to be sort of the font of all that is Christ. We constantly are called to turn to him in humility and recognize that. So I think that in the area of donations and apostolates and all of that, we need to, we have too many stories, too many examples of good organizations crashing and burning because they've forgotten it. Mm-hmm. And sadly, elements of the church herself has imitated that sad scenario, because, the church will not collapse, the church will not fail, but the organizations and institutions that call themselves Catholic are just as vulnerable as any other not-for-profit if they lose sight of the truth of the gospel. And too many have. I mean, we just went through all of that with the exposure of the U.S. aid and all of the things that were connected with that. Money was being misspent. And I think a basic final thing I would say is, let's, as Christians, look for ways to support apostolates that don't just dive deeply into tax-free and all of those things that are part of a government system that we know is deeply corrupt. The corruption, there's certainly goodness there and good people that are operating in the system, but I think that we do need to actively look for ways to simply bypass a lot of that and encourage people to do their almsgiving in a way that challenges them and us to truly do it for the right reasons, not to just support some favorite platform, but to support the truth that is Christ.
Very well said, Your Excellency. At the end of Mass this Sunday, there was a letter read from a Ugandan, I think they're missionary brothers in Uganda. They were talking about kind of, there's a partnership with the particular church I went to this week, and these missionaries in Uganda. And it just kind of brought things to perspective, because they were talking about how they have their brothers teaching in schools, and really their charism is education. And they were asking for support. First and foremost, they were talking about just getting clean running water, and how a lot of their students would have to walk 1 mile, 2 miles out in order to kind of get water. And it's very dependent upon the seasons and animals and all these other kind of factors. So I was thinking, it's very easy to kind of look at the big arms of charity, both government and the church, and we have criticisms and of course, and trying to figure out like how to navigate. But when I hear situations like that, like where our money can very directly go towards things we don't even consider in this country, right? Basic necessities like running water. There's a very beautiful Christian thing to kind of step up to the plate and do something about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I would caution all of us is, don't let your almsgiving diminish because you see corruption. And we have really the responsibility to not support something that is corrupt, but we also have that responsibility that is always there from the gospel to share what God has given us. To remember all the blessings we have in this nation and individually are blessings from God. And we've got to be willing to share and to let go of the possessions that we have, knowing that they're not our salvation. And I think that the simple things like, helping people have clean water, talk about basics for humanity, those basic needs, and to support an organization that has a good record and is clearly doing those basic things that in some ways help them to avoid some of the corruptions, because it is so basic. I think those are good examples of when people have hearts that have been moved by the gospel, like the wealthy young man that was asked to give up everything and follow Christ. We're all, in a sense, those wealthy young men and women. I think in the United States, I've often said as a pastor, I don't believe, and I include myself, I don't believe we realize how wealthy we are in comparison to many in the world. And we hear those gospels, the wealthy young man, and we say, well, I'm not wealthy. I don't have the fancy car, the fancy house, or make the big salary. But in a very real gospel sense, we're all wealthy. And so we're all challenged to give of that wealth in ways that really hurt, in a sense, that has a sting, that makes us feel like we've really given something, not just of the surplus, but of the substance of who we are. Another gospel image, the the widow's mite. It may not seem like very much, but when we give it of our substance, of what we've given up, something very real in order to help someone else have something much more basic, that is what the gospel calls us to.
Very well said. 1 minute here before the music, Your Excellency. So I'll just also mention this. I've heard that, with as Catholics, I've heard great homilies on our time, our talent, and our treasure. And I've heard that it's not just, we often focus just on the treasure portion, but even with time to the church, they say that 5% of your parishioners are the ones who are doing the majority of kind of the jobs around the parish. And so it's, that calling again for people trying to get deeper into the faith, deeper into their generosity, their charity, with not just their treasure, but their time and their talent. This is why I like to usher at whatever church I find myself at, or do a lot of video work. I tend to, end up doing that kind of thing. So just something that kind of helps the church and is a selfless act, I think is a really important thing.
Sure. Well, as we know, even in the very corporate world, time is money.
Yep.
And so giving of your time is a great donation as well.
Yeah. This is a great episode, friends. We're on with Bishop Strickland today. This is a pre-record, so we have pre-submitted questions, but God willing, we won't run him too ragged. So you can go ahead and get your own specific questions in for Bishop Strickland for next time he's on. You can do that at all the usual channels, 1-877-511-5483, or email those questions priest@thestationofthecross.com and specify those to His Excellency, and we'll make sure that we'll put them on the document in the event that we have to do another pre-record with him. Maybe it'll be live next time too. Who knows these things, right? Hey, I'm Jordan Pacheco. Don't go anywhere. We got great questions, starting with this one from Patrick, the church's position on social justice issues. We are right off to the races today, friends, and we'll be right back in just a couple minutes. God bless you.
Introducing iCatholic Mobile, a mobile phone service that keeps you connected while supporting your faith. With every call, text, or web browse, a portion of your plan helps sustain the mission of the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network to spread the truth, defend the unborn, and strengthen souls. More info at iCatholicMobile.com. iCatholic Mobile underwrites for the Station of the Cross.
You're listening to Ask a Priest Live from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network and the iCatholic Radio mobile app. Give us a call at 1-877-511-5483 or send us an email at priests@thestationofthecross.com.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. It is a very special episode today. We have Bishop Strickland back in the hot seat, and your questions here are not disappointing. We're going to keep trekking with these questions, but certainly if you're hearing this particular episode, it's a pre-record. But when we get Bishop on again live, do send those questions in, even beforehand. 1-877-511-5483. Well, we started out of the gate strong with a question about government and Christian charities. Let's continue on, because Patrick here says the church's position on social issues, rather social justice issues, confuses me. Oof, clearly my words are confused too. Now, most bishops, other clergy, and even popes seem to have embraced that politically liberal philosophy as a way to alleviate poverty is to soak the rich and transfer wealth. And this is in spite of the fact that their approach to solving problems. I'm going to skip a little bit of preamble in here. So here we go. The confusing part is that in virtually every other area of human activity, the church does teach the importance of personal responsibility, and she is right to do so. Why then does she persist in promoting the failed idea of a government-enforced redistribution as a cornerstone of her approach to poverty?
Well, I think the answer is we need to know the actual social justice teachings of the church and not sort of the modern iteration that we hear a lot. And one of the best, there are really many documents, but I would say one of the key is Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII. Just as a lot of what we're dealing with and consider just part of the world we live in, the industrial age, the information, all of the things that we consider just part of the normal lives that we lead, it was just beginning to surface at that time, toward the end of the 19th century. And Rerum Novarum lays down some basic principles that I think get at the question that the caller asks, and guides us away from the idea of, big government fixing things, or the idea that, the wealthy are bad and the poor are good. I mean, Christ says, blessed are the poor. And in another version of the gospel, blessed are the poor in spirit. I mean, I think both of those remind us that the blessing in being poor in this world, in whatever form that takes, whatever way we approach poverty, I mean, we're all called to a spirit of poverty in a sense, is reminding us where the real treasure is. And that is in the truth that is Jesus Christ. It's in our Catholic faith. It's in living for eternity, the salvation of our souls. That's the treasure we're after. And we need to be fighting for it tenaciously in this life. That's what it's about. And I think the social justice issues get lost when they start forgetting that basic goal. And Rerum Novarum says it much better than I could. In a papal document from more than 100 years ago. But I think it lays down some principles that even as we hear bishops or popes in more modern times speak, we need to look at what did the church have to say when all of this really started, as far as these conflicts between wealth and poverty. You were just mentioning Uganda and their need for just clean water. And I think that's a reminder of what we have to cut through to a lot of times is what are the real needs and what are the individual children of God? What's going on with them? I think one of the greatest principles that gets lost in the world today that will be helpful for understanding social justice is subsidiarity. And that, I mean, God is the author of subsidiarity. And you might say, well, that's not in the gospel. What are you talking about? But subsidiarity basically just means God deals with individuals. And each of us need to remember our individual responsibilities, our individual blessings, and we need to always go back to subsidiarity. Where is the very best of human endeavor? It's on the local scene. Hopefully, I mean, that's where it needs to happen with subsidiarity is in families. And we know, absolutely, in Uganda or in Texas or wherever we are, the principle of the family being that basic anchor for every human being, it breaks down. Sinfulness enters in, brokenness, sometimes through the fault of the individuals in the family, sometimes it's just circumstances, but it becomes very complicated. But I think that principle of subsidiarity, really it starts with you and I as sons of God and living as responsibly as we can. We have an obligation to meet our needs, to have adequate food, adequate shelter, adequate everything that helps us be the sons of God we're called to be. But anytime, and I mean, I can say, I have an obligation to share the wealth that I have. And I wouldn't be gauged as a wealthy man in terms of the world. But like I was saying earlier, in our context in the U.S., and there's certainly real poverty in the United States, but even the poverty that we see looks wealthy compared to someone in Uganda who doesn't even have water. That's about as basic as it gets. Mm-hmm. So the social justice issues, I think one of the primary, besides reading something like Rerum Novarum, is basing it on that principle of subsidiarity, looking for the most down-to-earth, local, individual fix that we can find. Security in our homes. Well, that means being a person who respects other people's property and a person who makes the proper steps for not tempting people. I mean, if you have a brand new car and you leave it unlocked, that in a sense is, I think in a very real sense, that's irresponsible for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't inviting someone to steal it, but you're allowing temptations for, a young person to see a gorgeous new car. I'm into cars. I love cars. I always can see a car, and I just always have ever since I was a kid. But that can be very tempting. Or any time when we are less than prudent in our responsibility and subsidiarity, we're leaving it open to tempt someone to do something that's wrong. And so I think it's at those very basic levels that social justice really works. And it gets so lost in some of the rhetoric. To me, the whole border issues and having a secure border, absolutely. A nation has an obligation to welcome those who are trying to come legally and who are in need, who need a better life. That's what built this nation, people coming here to seek a better life, really from the very beginning. They journeyed across the ocean to find a better life. And we've got to keep that spirit in the nation. And that's part of the social justice as well. But it's always, anytime social justice moves beyond the individual, there's at least one other person involved, and usually it's other communities or other nations. It grows to be global, but we always have to use the basic principles. And I guess that's the final thing I would say in this context is go to the principles that Rerum Novarum and other documents lay down about authentic social justice and apply those principles. I think even as church, we too often go with the emotion, go with what we're thinking, instead of applying the principles of the basic realities that have been worked out to help guide us through sometimes very difficult decisions, but things that will remind us. And the Lord says in the gospel that when we give of ourselves, we will not have to worry about being rewarded 100-fold. We have to have always that spirit of generosity and recognizing, how much do I really need? How much do any of us really need? And part of that is what the social justice is built on as well, because when someone becomes fabulously wealthy, they may have worked hard to earn that, but they've got the obligation to ask, what do I need here? And what should I share to help someone who is demonstrating their subsidiarity-based decisions to work hard, to get an education, to get ahead in life? Like I'm sure a lot of those young people in Uganda that you refer to, we have the obligation of helping them get something as basic as water so that they can make those individual choices that allow them to flourish and ultimately approach the ultimate flourishing that's in everlasting life.
Very, very well said indeed. Friends, plenty of questions here on the document. We're going to go through a couple here from Paul. Paul says, Your Excellency, what is the origin of titular bishops and when did they first appear? And also, what is the origin of auxiliary bishops and when did they first appear?
Well, the titular bishop is really more theologically based than the question of auxiliary bishops. That's more of a managerial question. Honestly, don't know when the auxiliary bishops developed historically. I would imagine fairly early on, maybe not called that, but recognizing that a single bishop, the diocesan bishop, may have just more to do than is humanly possible in an archdiocese. Usually an archdiocese is what has auxiliaries. But going back to the more theologically based titular bishop, what that comes down to is the church's theological recognition that every bishop has a munus. I mean, that's a fancy canonical word for a work, a location, or really not a location, but a work to do. And so when a bishop is ordained, typically, I mean, like when I became Bishop of Tyler, I didn't need a titular see because Tyler was my see. It was the flock that I was given to be responsible for. And I like to use that language of the bishop and the flock. Auxiliary bishops are given a titular see, and cardinals. You may have heard about some of the cardinals recently going to visit their titular church in Rome. Even it's fairly complex because the history of the church is complex, and there's a lot of organizational development. But the basic principles are there, where the cardinals are mainly, or maybe totally, working in the Vatican. They're given a job of running what are called dicasteries now. There were congregations before, whatever name we use. That bishop, that cardinal, who is a bishop as well, doesn't have a flock. And so the titular see really is a reminder, and it's a theological mechanism to say, okay, every bishop has to have a flock. And so they're given a titular see, and that means that symbolically that bishop is reminded he needs to care for the flock, even though he may not have a territorial flock that he's responsible for.
I see. Oh, I almost forgot, Paul. I see your question about optimal diocese size. I'd love to get Bishop Strickland's thoughts on that. But dang, friends, we're already halfway through the show, and a lot of great questions have been sent in. So we'll get to that question, Paul, about optimal diocese sizes. And then another question coming off of YouTube. This one was a question about, can bishops of the Roman Catholic Church collectively remove a pope? We're gonna go back to the Great Schism, aren't we? And then Benjamin, I see yours on Paul VI and his quote about the smoke of Satan entering the church. So friends, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of these questions and more Bishop Strickland. This is Ask a Priest Live.
For the weekly show lineup or resources from past episodes, check out our show page at thestationofthecross.com or watch our live video feeds on Facebook, YouTube, or Rumble to interact with the show team and submit your questions in real time. Just search for Ask a Priest Live.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. Halfway through the show here with Bishop Strickland, and a lot of great questions still to get through. Starting with this one, actually, though, Your Excellency, I didn't know this, but you mentioned earlier that you are a car guy. So for you, what is your favorite kind of car, or maybe style of cars?
Well, as a kid and still, I always leaned toward the Corvette Stingray.
Yeah,
I actually like some of the more classic models than maybe some of the newest, but I've always been intrigued by cars. I used to go to the car show at the Texas State Fair. And and there are a lot. I like some of the futuristic cars. When I was in Cuba, I really enjoyed, there are a lot of sort of cannibalized. They just keep some of the like 50s and 60s era cars going. And I enjoyed seeing some of that. So an old car, an unusual car will always catch my eye. I was just up in, like I said, Kansas City, and I noticed a pretty Mercedes. I mean, so I'm pretty eclectic with what I like about cars, but I do like the modern sports car models that are very streamlined and full of gadgets. There's a YouTube channel that I like to watch sometimes, something about cars. I mean, it's all about, the cutting edge cars where, the self-driving and all that stuff. So
this is going to obviously beg the question, what's your opinion on the Cybertruck?
It's ugly.
Yeah.
I I'm intrigued by it. I've never been in one. I have actually seen a few, even in Tyler and around that area. Not many, but I've seen them. It just looks sort of like a rolling dumpster to me.
That's very apt. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by why it was designed that way and what it looks like on the inside, the engine and all of that. Or I guess it's electric. So, but the batteries.
Yeah, definitely. I've just thought of it. It looks like if it was in the 1980s version of Blade Runner, I think it would fit. But every time I see it on the road, I just have to kind of gawk at it because I'm like, man, the jagged edges. What is it? What is this 80 CGI? Like, what did we find ourselves in? And of course, coming from like the countryside I come from, I can't like it. I'm just not allowed to. It's not enough of a truck, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we got this question, Paul. I didn't forget this third one that you sent in. I think it's a great question too. Bishop, what is the optimal size of a diocese if there's only one bishop who is the ordinary of it?
Well, I can't tell you the optimal size as far as numbers or area or anything. But I think in dealing with that question, I think there are a lot of issues to deal with regarding the present model of bishop in the church, in this country and really around the world. And I would hope that in the future, some of that can be reexamined. I mean, I guess the best, in reflecting on some of those issues, I would point to the apostles. I mean, there were 11, and then they included Matthias. So 12 went out after Pentecost to build the church. So whatever that ratio is, it was, the laborers are few, but the harvest is rich. I mean, that's always been the dynamic reality of the church. And I think we need to remember that in the context of what's the optimal size of a diocese. And so, I mean, the apostles going out to the whole known world at that time, I don't know that that's the optimal size, but, I don't want to question the Lord. And that's how he started things. The original bishops had 1/12 of the world to deal with. So that's, I mean, if we went back to that model, that is totally overwhelming. But I think to talk about, the factors that should guide the church in having bishops named to a flock in a diocese. Some of those factors are, what is the bishop's real ability to guide that flock? So with technology, the size issues change a bit. I mean, like in this nation, as opposed to maybe I was just talking to someone recently who had visited India, and, they said, it's just part of life that they lose power all the time. I mean, in that kind of context, it brings challenges that, we may get aggravated if occasionally you lose power. But like what we're doing now, if you couldn't count on the power being on for a full recorded hour, then, that creates its own challenges. So again, in our nation, I think we have really luxuries, even in the question of the size that a bishop can manage to be the shepherd of that flock. And it's probably larger than in some areas in the world. So some of those factors would need to be considered. But I think the main answer I would have to that question is we need to look at, what is a bishop really about? The church is about the salvation of souls. And so the bishop, as a successor of the apostles, needs to be primarily about the salvation of souls in that flock that he's given. One thing that I learned, because I was bishop in a very non-Catholic area, one thing that was emphasized by some of my predecessors that thankfully I was smart enough to listen to was a reminder that for us as church, every baptized person is a member of the church. And certainly in non-Catholic East Texas, many would say, well, I don't want to be a member of your church. But we know theologically that if you're baptized, you're a member of the mystical body of Christ that is the church. So that's the responsibility of the flock that a bishop has. So I think I know I'm not really answering the question, but I think hopefully I'm giving some things to think about in relationship to that question. And I think we need to re-examine what is the real job of the bishop. Bishop means episkopoi, from Greek, means overseer. But I think we've become men that oversee a lot of worldly things, sometimes to the detriment of overseeing the salvation of the souls of the flock. And I think that that's where the real questions about the size of a diocese and how a bishop can truly oversee the souls of his flock in the most robust and joyful and loving way.
This question here, Your Excellency, this came from GGME off YouTube. They say, I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I do have a question. Can bishops of the Roman Catholic Church collectively remove a pope or perhaps censure him?
Well, simple answers probably are the best to these questions. The answer is no. Bishops canonically don't have that authority. There are some, I don't think it's ever been used, but there are mechanisms in canon law that the cardinals could have, invoke those mechanisms if they chose to. It's talking about extremes that even in some of the situations, of course, we haven't seen cardinals choose to engage those basic principles laid down in canon law. If, let's say a pope truly becomes unable to fulfill his office through maybe has a terrible stroke or something, but there are mechanisms for the cardinals to intervene. We haven't seen that happen. So the basic answer to that question is certainly the individual bishop or conference of bishops like the USCCB, even a group of bishops that might come together from many nations. It's not on the bishop level that would even have the possibility of that. I mean, they can raise their voice and ask questions and concerns, but as far as actually being able to have a pope removed, that's more at the cardinal level. And even then, it's very specific criteria that would guide the cardinals in that kind of situation.
This question here, friends, by the way, this is a pre-recorded show, but if you want to get your questions in for Bishop Strickland's next appearance, please go ahead and still call and get those questions in via the usual ways. Just be sure to specify that you want them for Bishop Strickland. I mean, he has to say yes to getting back on, but hopefully we're doing all right. We'll see. This question here, always a curious one here from Benjamin, Your Excellency. What did Pope Paul VI mean when he said that the smoke of Satan has entered the church in 1972?
Well, I can't claim to fully know what Pope Paul VI meant when he said that. But what immediately occurs to me, and I see the connection with what Pope Leo XIII experienced, it's written a record of Pope Leo XIII, and it was witnessed with people. He had an episode there while he was Pope. I'm not sure of the physical setting, but I assume it was in his apartments. I don't remember if it was connected to finishing celebrating Mass, but anyway, Pope Leo XIII had a vision where he shared that it's where the St. Michael prayer came from, that he had a vision that God and Satan were having some sort of a dialogue, I guess. And Satan says, give me 100 years and I'll destroy this church of your son, Jesus Christ. And God says, okay, go for it. I mean, in the vernacular, I don't think God.
Yeah, whatever it is in the Latin.
Yeah. But so to me, that is where we can trace back that we need to pay attention to what Paul VI says. Not 100 years later, but many years later, many papacies later, when he says the smoke of Satan has entered. I think that we need to pay attention to that. Certainly, we have to sadly say we've seen evil manifest in the church with corrupt cardinals and bishops. And so that smoke is visible. It's obvious. And I think that what it reminds us, we need to pray the St. Michael prayer. And I would love to see Pope Leo XIV follow in his predecessor's lead and reinstate the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel. As Pope Leo said, it needed to be offered after every low Mass. Of course, it was only the traditional Latin Mass at that time. But I think that I would love to see that reinstated, because evil is real. We see it manifest. We've seen it. You mentioned Uganda. Evil is at work in Nigeria with some of the terrible things happening there that we don't see much reporting on. Evil is real. Satan is real. His minions, like the St. Michael prayer reminds us, his minions are looking for opportunities to take us away from the salvation of our souls. That's the greatest evil. So I think basically commenting on Paul VI's comment about the smoke of Satan, I think he was recognizing that after his papacy, it was toward the end of his papacy that he said that. And I think he was seeing what we're seeing, that evil's real presence is manifest in the church. Certainly, always we need to remember, and I always repeat that what Christ himself said, the gates of hell will not prevail. That smoke of Satan will not smoke us out. It will not have its day in the sense of a final victory. But that smoke of Satan, you keeping with that analogy, it can choke out a lot of good, a lot of beauty, a lot of truth, and it can choke out a lot of individual souls. And so we need to pay attention to it, always remembering Christ is the one who clears the smoke.
We have one more segment with Bishop Strickland today on this fantastic show, friends. We're going to get through some of these questions that have been sent in. But if you've been enjoying the show, please don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe, especially on the video feeds like YouTube. And if you listen on radio, to share the radio feed far and wide. And if you listen also afterwards on the podcast sites, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, it's very helpful if you leave a 5-star review for the show. Just a great way to show Catholics and non-Catholics alike that Ask a Priest Live is a great resource for them to get their questions answered. Well, I'm Jordan Pacheco, and don't go anywhere. We still have a few more questions to get through, and hopefully we'll be right back very soon here with Bishop Strickland, here in our final segment. We'll be right back. God bless you.
Never miss an episode by subscribing to our podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the free iCatholic Radio mobile app on your Android and Apple mobile devices. Listen on the go at your convenience, and consider leaving us a 5-star review if you're enjoying the show.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. This has been a great episode so far. We are here with Bishop Strickland. You all know him. I know him. And by the way, if you want to hear of him and me a little bit more, actually, His Excellency was on my podcast a few months back. You can just type in Glad Trad Podcast, Bishop Strickland. We had a great conversation talking. I think the title is The Truth About the Catholic Bishops, which maybe is a slightly more sensational than it actually was. But just a good conversation about the role of a bishop. Your Excellency, I know that we had a question talking about that. So I was just thinking that if people want to go in depth, that also would be probably a good resource for them.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'll have to get you back on, by the way, but we'll talk about that later. Hopefully I didn't scare you off the first time. Well, here's this question, Your Excellency. Anonymous asks, if a Catholic marries a Protestant outside the church with no Catholic official present and or without the permission from the bishop, what is the status of the Catholic? Will the couple be able to baptize children in the church, or does the marriage need to be regularized in order to do this?
Well, the couple can baptize children. The status of the Catholic is that they are not able to receive communion, go to confession, receive the sacraments themselves personally. Mm-hmm. It's more of a decision of their priest regarding the baptism of children, which certainly it's a related question, but the basic guide for priests baptizing children is there a well-founded hope that the child will live as a baptized Christian, as a member of the Catholic Church? If the priest judges, and this can be the case beyond the sacramental status of the mother and father or the marriage, it really is a question pastorally that the priest needs to ask. I mean, it may be two Catholics married by the bishop in a Catholic church, but if they're just approaching baptism as sort of a social thing to do, then the priest would have a legitimate reason to not baptize that child. Always wanting the baptism of a child for the sake of the salvation of their souls, for the sanctifying grace that comes from baptism. But again, emphasizing that baptism is a way of living out your life. And if it's just something to keep grandma happy, or because of the social pressures, or it's a beautiful church and it looks like a beautiful ceremony, then the priest would have at least legitimate reason to really ask some deeper questions. Going back to the status of the Catholic in that situation, like I said, they're not, the sacraments aren't open to them. Their situation is that they're not able to live actively their Catholic faith because, you sometimes hear the sacrament spoken of as a system. Maybe that's not the best word, but the way I would say it is the sacraments are a way of life. And if you're living in a union that isn't blessed by the church, as far as the church is concerned, you're living a life of sin. You're living outside the church's structure. And so your way of life is out of order, and you need to get it in order. Actually, as pastor, I faced the question many times, and it can be, marriage needs to be approached as marriage itself. There are too many marriages. I worked in the tribunal for 15 years, and I saw too many people marry for secondary reasons. And when that happens, most of the time the marriage doesn't work because it really can often be declared invalid. And I know I'm getting into a lot, but all of these things are related. So when a couple, one Catholic, one non-Catholic, marries, or when two Catholics marry, what's called canonical form is required. The Catholic is obligated to marry in a way that fits with canonical form, which basically is, it's fairly simple. You can get dispensations, so it's not like, oh, well, you can't marry a non-Catholic. Sure you can, but there are things that need to be dispensed and special permissions and all of that. Mm-hmm. But when a Catholic ignores, I guess the simplest thing is to say, if canonical form is ignored or not respected, then the marriage doesn't exist as far as the church is concerned. And I know that that's hard for people to grasp. I dealt with it constantly working in the tribunal because sometimes it was a very clear reality that this person looked like they were married, and society respected that as a marriage. But if a Catholic is married in a way that does not follow canonical form, the marriage doesn't exist for them, for the church. It doesn't look like, well, it's not a good marriage. It just doesn't exist. And so that mindset carries over into a lot of the marriage theology of the church. It was drilled into us studying canon law that the consent makes the marriage. A marriage comes into existence, interestingly, by the church's theology and canon law. Marriage is celebrated by the man and woman marrying. They are the ones to live the sacrament, and it's celebrated by them. The priest is the official witness of the church that needs to be there. That's what canonical form deals with. But it's not that the priest has to be there for these two people to marry. They have to be marrying each other and making that lifelong commitment of fidelity. But so when that doesn't happen, the marriage doesn't exist. And if two people are living, a man and a woman are living together, it's considered a sinful union by the church because they're not married, in the eyes of the church. And so I would encourage anyone listening to this, if maybe this raises some questions for you, or if you're contemplating marriage, to pay attention to the reality of canon law in the church, of the canonical form, and to respect that. Like I said, if you're planning a marriage to a non-Catholic and you're a faithful baptized Catholic, the canonical form is not insurmountable. I mean, it is some, steps to take, some, you could say, bureaucracy, but it's just making sure that the two people are baptized. I mean, it's a different dispensation if one is not even baptized. So it gets a little complicated, but the bottom line in the question that was offered was, the reality is the non-Catholic who doesn't follow canonical form is not in a marriage that is recognized by the church. And in order to baptize children, you need to be in a marriage recognized by the church. There are remedies, and I would encourage and urge that, because too many people have walked away from the church because they said, oh, I married a non-Catholic, so I was excommunicated and I left the church. There are remedies, there are ways to take care of it, but you have to follow that canonical form.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for coming on today, for getting through all of these questions. We very much appreciate it. I can't wait till you're on next time, indeed. And thank you all listeners and viewers for tuning in. Please don't forget, of course, to subscribe to the video feed, as well as to like and subscribe to Ask a Priest Live in all of its forms. The radio station, share far and wide. And I do believe this is airing on Friday. So if that's the case, hey, you all have a very blessed, wonderful weekend. We're going to be back on Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, with more of our great priests and more Ask a Priest Live. So from all of us here who make this show possible, we say God bless you and Mary keep you. We will see y'all on Monday, and this is Ask a Priest Live. Take it easy.